She woke up before the sun as she did every morning. The city outside was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy and full of waiting. Her tiny apartment smelled faintly of coffee and old books. She pulled herself out of bed and stretched, feeling the ache in her muscles that came from days of long work and restless nights. She had been working as a waitress for years, and while some days were easier than others, most were long and exhausting. Yet, despite the exhaustion, there was a part of her that held on to something more, something she couldn't quite let go of. Music. It had always been music. From the first moment she touched a piano at the age of 7, she had known it was something special. She remembered the way the keys felt under her small fingers, the way the notes seemed to rise and fall like waves. Her parents had been proud but practical. They encouraged her to study and find a stable career, to focus on things that could pay bills and keep her life steady. Music, they said, was a dream, not a reality. But dreams have a way of lingering quietly in the corners of your life, and hers never left. Now, years later, she lived in a modest apartment above a cafe where she worked. The cafe was small but cozy, with warm lights and the faint aroma of baked bread. It was the kind of place where regular customers became familiar faces, and the same questions were asked every day. How's your day going? Busy morning? Can I get the usual? She served them with a smile, remembering to nod and laugh in the right places while her mind often drifted to the piano in her imagination. Sometimes when she washed the dishes in the back or refilled the coffee machine, she would hum quietly, a tune only she knew. Her co-workers liked her. They said she had a calm presence that made the cafe feel more welcoming. They didn't know about the music inside her, the hours she had spent alone, teaching herself pieces by listening to old recordings and following sheet music she had saved from years past. They didn't know how she could close her eyes and see an entire song in her head before it even touched the keys, and perhaps that was for the best. It kept her dreams safe, untouched by the judgment of others. Some days were harder than others. The cafe could be overwhelming, with customers who demanded too much, tipping poorly, or complaining endlessly. She had learned to keep her emotions in check, to smile through impatience and fatigue. At times she wondered if her life would always feel this way, trapped between the job she needed and the dream she couldn't fully pursue. She had applied for music schools long ago but had been turned away, and then life had simply moved forward, carrying her along with it. One morning she arrived at the cafe to find it busier than usual. A local music critic had been in the city, visiting various cafes to see which ones hosted live talent, and somehow people had started talking about her. It was strange to think that something so private, her quiet humming, could ever become noticed. She shrugged it off, thinking it was just idle chatter. She had no desire to perform publicly. The thought made her stomach twist. Still, the day went on. She moved from table to table, pouring coffee, serving pastries, wiping crumbs from counters. Each customer seemed to be in a rush, eager to get on with their day, leaving her little room to think beyond the immediate tasks. Yet even in the middle of chaos, she carried a sense of music inside her, a rhythm she couldn't shake. It wasn't loud or showy, just a soft presence that followed her like a shadow. During her lunch break, she slipped out to the small courtyard behind the cafe. It was a quiet place with a few tables and chairs tucked under a line of trees. She took a deep breath, feeling the sun on her face, and allowed herself a moment to imagine sitting at a piano again. She could almost feel the keys under her fingers, the sound filling the empty space around her. It was a familiar comfort, like returning to a friend she hadn't seen in years. She remembered the first time she had played in front of anyone. She had been 9, and her parents had brought her to a small recital. Her hands had trembled as she sat at the piano, and when she started, the notes had been shaky. But by the end, the room had grown silent, and she had felt something she had never felt before. A quiet power, the ability to make others feel something without saying a word. That memory stayed with her even now when her life felt far from that moment of triumph. Her co-workers called her back to the cafe, and she returned to the rush of orders and steaming cups. One particular customer caught her attention. He was older, with a careful smile and eyes that seemed to notice more than others did. He lingered at the counter, listening as she moved gracefully between tables. At one point, he asked a casual question about her hobbies. She shrugged and smiled, answering vaguely. Music, she said lightly. He raised his eyebrows, a flicker of curiosity in his expression. You play? He asked, His tone wasn't judgmental, just genuinely curious. "A little," she replied. "Just for myself." He nodded, as if understanding something unspoken. "I'd love to hear you play someday," he said. Then he smiled and returned to his coffee. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Customers came and went, some friendly, some impatient, but her mind kept returning to that brief exchange. What would it be like to play for someone outside of her apartment, outside of her imagination? The thought was thrilling, but it also scared her. She had spent so long protecting her music, keeping it safe from criticism, that the idea of performing felt almost impossible. That night she walked home slowly, carrying the quiet ache of her feet and the weight of the day. The city lights flickered in the distance, and she allowed herself to dream just for a moment of playing a piano in front of a real audience. She imagined their faces, the silence as the first note floated into the air, the swell of sound and feeling. Her heart beat faster, a mixture of excitement and fear. Back in her apartment, she sat at her small table and opened an old notebook. It was filled with notes and compositions she had written over the years, fragments of songs and melodies that had never been heard. She traced her fingers over the lines, remembering the moments when each piece had come to her. Some were joyful, some sad, all deeply personal. She thought about how she had hidden these pieces from the world, keeping them tucked away like secrets. As she closed the notebook, she felt a mixture of longing and determination. Life as a waitress was not glamorous, and it did not feel like it would lead to anything extraordinary. Yet within her there was something untouchable, something that had survived despite the years of routine and responsibility. Music, her constant companion, her quiet rebellion against the ordinary. Sleep eventually claimed her, but her dreams were alive with the sound of a piano. She played in grand halls, in small cafes, in empty rooms filled only with echoes of her own music. Each dream carried a message she couldn't ignore. She was meant for more than serving tables and pouring coffee. She was meant to share her music, to let it speak in a world that had never truly heard her voice. The next morning came with the same early light, the same ache in her muscles, but something inside her felt different. There was a flicker of courage she hadn't noticed before. Maybe it was the conversation with the curious customer. Maybe it was the memory of that first recital. Whatever it was, it made her realize that the life she wanted might not be as far away as she had thought. She put on her apron and walked to the cafe, the streets slowly filling with people rushing to work. She moved with the rhythm she had always carried, a hidden melody guiding her steps. And as she opened the cafe doors, the world felt just a little wider, just a little more full of possibility. The music inside her was waiting, patient but insistent, ready to find its voice. And so her day began like any other, with orders to take, cups to fill, and customers to greet. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. She carried within her the quiet knowledge that soon, perhaps sooner than she imagined, the music would no longer be just hers. It would reach beyond the cafe walls, beyond the small apartment above the street. And when it did, she would be ready to play. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. She woke early, walked the same streets, served the same tables, and went home with tired feet. Yet no matter how ordinary the days seemed, a quiet tension had begun to grow inside her. That brief conversation with the curious customer lingered in her mind. She kept thinking about his words, the way he had smiled as if he knew she was capable of something more. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was nothing, just idle chatter. But deep down, a small spark of possibility had been lit. It was on a Thursday afternoon when the first real pressure arrived. The cafe manager, a tall man with a booming voice and a personality that filled the room, called her aside while she was cleaning up a spilled coffee. He smiled, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that made her stomach tighten. "I heard you play piano," he said casually, as if it were no big deal. She froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. I play a little," she said softly, almost wishing the ground would swallow her up. "A little?" he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "We've got a live music night coming up. I think it's time you showed us what you can do." Her heart jumped into her throat. She had imagined playing, dreamed about it in quiet moments, but the thought of performing in front of a crowd filled her with fear. I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "I'm not ready for that." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, I've seen talent before, and this is something special. People are going to be here for the music night and you'd be perfect. Don't hide your gift. Give them a show they won't forget. She wanted to protest, to explain that she hadn't performed in years and that her fingers might not remember what to do. But before she could find the words, he walked away, leaving her alone with her racing thoughts. The rest of her shift passed in a haze. Orders came and went, but she moved through them mechanically, her mind replaying the manager's words. She thought about all the times she had imagined playing in front of people, the way the music had once made her feel alive, and now the possibility was real. Too real. That night she went home and sat at her small table staring at the blank wall. She traced her fingers over the notebook of music she had carried with her for years. Each piece represented a memory, a moment in her life that had shaped her. She thought about the nights she had spent learning, the sacrifices she had made, and the quiet determination that had kept her going. Could she really take all of that and put it into a performance? Could she risk exposing herself to judgment, to criticism, to failure? Sleep came fitfully with dreams full of imagined audiences and heavy silence. She saw herself sitting at a grand piano, her hands trembling, and felt the weight of every eye on her. She woke several times, heart pounding, unsure if she could face the day. The next morning, the cafe was busier than ever. People seemed to sense the approaching weekend, and the chatter was louder, more impatient. She moved through the crowd, taking orders, carrying trays, and wiping tables, but the manager's words echoed in her mind. Each time she glanced at the piano in the corner of the cafe, which had sat unused for months, she felt a mixture of fear and longing. By the afternoon, she found herself alone in the back room, fingers hovering over the keys of the piano. The surface was dusty, and the wood felt cold beneath her hands. She pressed a key softly, and a single note rang out, trembling but clear. It was enough to remind her of the years she had spent learning, enough to make her fingers itch to play. Slowly, almost unwillingly, she began to play a simple melody, letting the music flow as it had always done. But then the reality hit her. This was not her apartment, not the quiet place where she could play without fear. People would be watching, expecting her to perform something impressive. What if she forgot the notes? What if her fingers betrayed her? Panic rose like a tide, and she stopped abruptly, leaning back in her chair and burying her face in her hands. Her phone buzzed. A message from the manager. Everyone's excited for music night. We're counting on you. Don't disappoint us. She felt her chest tighten. The words were meant to encourage, but all she felt was pressure. She paced the small room, trying to calm her racing mind. Could she really do this? Could she face a crowd after hiding her music for so long? That evening, she spoke with a friend from work, someone who had noticed her quiet love for music. Her friend was enthusiastic, full of encouragement. You've got this, they said. People will love it. Just play from your heart. That's all anyone can ask. The words helped, but the fear remained. She thought about all the times she had imagined applause, the smiles of people moved by her music, and then she thought about the alternative. Embarrassment, judgment, the feeling of failing in front of everyone. She went to bed that night with a mixture of hope and dread, unable to sleep for the thoughts swirling in her mind. The morning of music night arrived quickly. She woke with her hands tingling, as if they already remembered what was to come. She dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were comfortable but presentable, and walked to the cafe with her heart pounding in her chest. The street was busier than usual, and she noticed the way people moved, unaware of the small drama unfolding inside the cafe. Inside, the atmosphere was different. Tables were filled, chatter was louder, and there was an energy that made the air feel electric. The piano sat in the corner, a silent reminder of what was to come. She approached it slowly, her fingers brushing the keys as if testing the waters. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to summon the courage that had stayed with her for so many years. The manager clapped his hands, calling attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice booming over the crowd, "we have a special treat tonight. Our very own Waitress, someone you all know, will be performing a piece she composed herself. Let's give her a warm welcome." Her stomach turned over. She had imagined applause before, but the reality was different. The cafe grew silent, all eyes turning toward her. She felt every gaze like a weight on her shoulders, every whisper like a question. Can she really do this? She sat down at the piano, fingers hovering above the keys. The first note felt strange, heavy, and unfamiliar. She pressed it, and it rang out, trembling but alive. Slowly she began to play, letting the music take over. At first it was hesitant, cautious, but as she continued, the melody began to flow naturally. The notes rose and fell, carrying with them the years of practice, the quiet struggles, and the hidden dreams that had defined her life. The audience was quiet at first, unsure what to expect. But gradually their attention sharpened. The music filled the cafe, touching each listener in a way words could not. People leaned forward, eyes wide, some with hands clasped, others with faces softened by emotion. It was a transformation both for her and for them. The timid girl who had been too afraid to share her music was now commanding the attention of everyone in the room. As the performance continued, she felt herself letting go of fear. Each note became a conversation, each chord a story. She remembered the nights spent practicing alone, the moments of doubt, the dreams of being heard, and now in this crowded cafe, her music was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone listening, and she felt a strange, exhilarating freedom. By the time the final notes faded, the cafe was silent for a heartbeat, as if no one could believe what they had just heard. Then slowly the room erupted in applause. People stood cheering and clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes. Her hands shook, but she felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a sense of validation and triumph she had never known before. The manager beamed, clapping along with the crowd. "See," he said, a grin on his face. "I told you everyone would love it." "You were amazing." She smiled, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over her. The pressure had been enormous, almost unbearable, but she had done it. She had faced her fear, stepped into the unknown, and emerged on the other side with her music shining brightly. After the performance, people came up to her praising her talent, asking questions about the pieces she had played and encouraging her to continue. For the first time, she realized that her dream, the one she had kept hidden for so long, was not impossible. It was real, and it had touched people in ways she had never imagined. That night, as she walked home, her heart still racing, she felt a sense of peace she had never known. The fear was still there, but it was tempered by something stronger, the knowledge that she could do it. She had faced pressure, doubt, and expectation, and she had risen above them. And in that moment, she understood something vital. Sometimes, the world pushes you toward what you are meant to do, even when you are afraid. The morning after her first performance, she woke with a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her body ached from hours of standing and tension, but her mind was alive with thoughts of music. She could still hear the applause in her ears, the murmurs of astonishment from the customers, and even the proud smile of the manager. It was a lot to take in, and yet the sense of possibility that had stirred in her chest the week before now felt stronger than ever. She walked to the cafe that morning, her steps light despite the long night she had spent replaying the events in her head. The streets were quieter than usual, the early light soft and calm, as if the world itself was waiting with her for what would come next. As she pushed open the cafe doors, she felt a strange warmth from the familiar bustle, and a little excitement at the thought of returning to her routine after the thrill of performing. The manager met her at the counter, his grin wider than ever. "You were incredible last night," he said, his voice full of pride. "People are still talking about it. Some even asked when you'll perform again." She smiled politely, feeling the weight of his words, but inside, doubt began to creep back. The performance had been terrifying, and she had only managed it because she had no choice but to play. Could she do it again? Could she face an audience and bring the same energy? Or would she falter under pressure?
As the day passed, she tried to focus on her usual tasks, taking orders, pouring coffee, serving pastries.
But her mind kept drifting back to the piano. Every time she glanced at it in the corner of the cafe, it seemed to call to her. The first notes she had played the night before had been hesitant, cautious, and yet there had been something undeniable in them. Something that she wanted to explore further. By the afternoon, a small crowd had started gathering near the cafe, curious about the music night that had made the previous evening so special. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach, but also a spark of determination. Maybe this was her chance to grow, to push herself beyond fear and doubt. She couldn't ignore it anymore. She had to face the music, both literally and figuratively. During her lunch break, she slipped into the back room and sat at the piano. The keys were cold under her fingers, and for a moment she hesitated, unsure if she could summon the courage to play again. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes, imagining the notes flowing freely like a river breaking through a dam. She began slowly, playing a simple tune, her fingers remembering the motions almost instinctively. But as she continued, she allowed herself to improvise, to experiment with the sound, letting her emotions guide the music instead of strict rules. The sound was different from the night before. It was softer, more personal, more alive. She could feel the music stretching out from her fingertips, carrying with it years of longing, of struggle, and of quiet hope. She realized that this was what she had been waiting for, a chance to express herself fully without holding back, without fear of judgment. Her thoughts drifted to the audience she would face that evening. She imagined their faces, their reactions, and she felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. What if they didn't understand? What if they didn't care? The fear was still there, but it was tempered by the growing knowledge that she had something valuable to share. She had to trust herself and the music she had carried for so long. The hours passed quickly, and soon it was time to return to the cafe floor. Customers came and went, some familiar, some new. But she moved through them with a calm determination, knowing that the real challenge would come later. She kept stealing glances at the piano, each one reminding her of the path she had chosen and the courage she needed to continue. As the sun began to set, the cafe transformed. The lights were dimmed, casting a warm glow over the room, and the murmurs of anticipation grew louder. The regular tables were filled and new faces had arrived, drawn by word of mouth about the previous night's performance. She felt her heart rate increase, but she also felt a strange sense of readiness. She had practiced, she had prepared, and now it was time to face the music once more. The manager approached, giving her an encouraging nod. "Remember," he said quietly, "just play from your heart. People will feel it." She nodded, gripping the edges of the piano bench as she sat down. Her hands hovered over the keys and she took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment to center herself. She remembered every lesson, every quiet practice session, every small victory and failure. All of it had led to this moment. The first notes were tentative, soft, as if testing the waters. But then something shifted. Her fingers began to move with confidence and the music started to flow naturally. She allowed herself to get lost in it, feeling the emotion behind each chord, the story behind each melody. The audience was quiet, leaning forward, captivated by the sound that filled the room. As she played, she noticed small details she hadn't before. The way the light fell on the piano, the expressions on the faces of her listeners, the subtle sounds of the cafe around her. Each detail added depth to the performance, and she allowed herself to absorb it all, to let it inspire her music. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story, one that only she could tell. The hours of preparation, the moments of doubt, and the years of hidden practice all converged into something extraordinary. She felt a sense of liberation, a release of tension that had built up over the years. The music was no longer just a dream. It was real, tangible, and powerful. As the final notes echoed through the cafe, there was a moment of silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, slowly, the applause began, growing louder and louder until it filled the room. People cheered, clapped, and some even stood, moved by the raw emotion and skill she had displayed. She smiled, tears pricking at her eyes, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment she had never known before. The manager approached again, his face beaming with pride. "You did it," he said. "That was amazing. You've truly found your voice." She nodded, overwhelmed by the moment. The fear that had gripped her earlier seemed distant now, replaced by a newfound confidence. She had faced the pressure, and she had not only survived but thrived. The music had carried her through, transforming her fear into something beautiful and powerful. After the performance, people came up to her, praising her talent and asking about the music she had played. Some were curious about the compositions, others about her journey, and all of them seemed genuinely moved. She realized that her music had touched people in a way words never could, creating a connection that transcended language and culture. That night, as she walked home under the city lights, she felt a sense of peace and possibility. She had faced the pressure of performing, and in doing so, she had discovered something profound. Her music had the power to move others, to inspire and to create beauty in the world. She sat by the window in her apartment, notebook in hand, and began to jot down new ideas, new melodies, and new dreams. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge between her inner world and the world around her. She felt a deep gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, for the struggles that had shaped her, and for the courage that had finally allowed her to step into the light. As the city slept outside, she played softly, letting the music fill the quiet space. Each note was a celebration of perseverance, of passion, and of the belief that sometimes the greatest rewards come when you face your fears and follow your heart. In the coming days, she knew there would be new challenges, new pressures, and perhaps new doubts. But she also knew something else. She had discovered her strength, her voice, and her gift. And with that knowledge, she felt ready to embrace whatever came next, letting the music guide her and inspire everyone who had the privilege of hearing it. The night of her next performance arrived, and with it a tension unlike anything she had experienced before. The cafe was packed, filled with people who had heard of her talent as well as newcomers curious to witness it for themselves. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a quiet excitement that buzzed beneath the hum of conversations and clinking of cups. She could feel it pressing against her chest as she walked in, her steps measured but determined. The manager approached her, his usual boisterous energy tempered by a serious expression. "Tonight," he said quietly, "I want you to play something that's entirely yours, something that tells your story. I know it's a lot of pressure, but I also know you can do it." Her heart skipped a beat. She had played before, but this was different. This was not just a tune to fill the air or to entertain casually. This was her chance to create something unforgettable, a piece that would speak for her, beyond the words she rarely found herself able to use. Fear and excitement twisted together inside her, a complicated knot she wasn't sure she could untangle. Back in the small room behind the cafe, she sat at the piano, staring at the keys. They seemed ordinary, yet to her they held infinite possibilities. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting her hands hover above the keys, feeling the weight of the moment. The piece she had planned was original, a culmination of everything she had lived through. The long nights of practicing, the exhaustion of working as a waitress, the quiet dreams that had never been spoken aloud. Her first notes were soft, tentative, almost as if she were testing the waters of her own courage. The audience could hear them, though they were subtle, barely more than a whisper of sound. Slowly, the melody began to grow, weaving itself into the air with a gentle insistence. It was personal, intimate, and yet it demanded attention. She let her fingers move naturally, letting the music guide her instead of trying to control it. As the piece unfolded, the cafe grew quiet. Conversations stopped, cups were left untouched, and all eyes turned to her. She could feel their attention like a physical weight, but instead of faltering, it fueled her. Every note she played carried emotion. Every chord told a story. She remembered the years she had spent dreaming of this moment, the sacrifices, the doubts, and the quiet resilience that had kept her going. And now, all of that was spilling out through her fingertips, raw and unfiltered. There were moments when she faltered, when a finger slipped or a chord sounded harsher than intended. But she didn't stop. She let the mistakes flow into the music, turning them into expression, into life. The audience responded instinctively, leaning in, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and emotion. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others whispered quietly to each other, unable to believe what they were hearing. She had never felt anything like this. The music was no longer just notes on a page. It was a conversation, a message, a confession. She poured herself into it. Every feeling she had buried for years, every hope and fear, every tear and smile. The cafe faded around her. The audience, the lights, even the clinking of cups disappeared. There was only her, the piano, and the music that demanded to be heard. As the piece reached its middle section, she allowed herself to explore the depths of emotion she had rarely admitted to. There were moments of tension, chords that clashed and resolved, passages that rose and fell like waves. The room seemed to hold its breath, captivated by the honesty in every note. She could feel the weight of their expectations, yet instead of breaking her, it elevated her. She was not performing for approval anymore. She was sharing herself, and that made all the difference. The climax of the piece was approaching. She had built it carefully, layer by layer, drawing the listener into a journey of struggle, hope, and triumph. Her fingers moved faster, more confidently, yet with delicate control. The notes cascaded, creating a powerful, almost overwhelming swell of sound that filled every corner of the cafe. It was her life in music form, and it was breathtaking. People leaned forward in their seats, some gasping quietly, others wiping away tears. Even the regulars who had seen her play casually before were struck silent, unable to tear their eyes from the performance. She could sense the impact of every chord, the resonance of every melody. This was more than applause. It was understanding, recognition, and awe. And then, as the piece began to descend from its peak, she slowed her hands, allowing the final notes to linger. Each one was deliberate, filled with meaning, carrying the weight of the journey she had just shared. The last note hung in the air, delicate and fading, leaving a quiet space that felt almost sacred. The cafe stayed silent for a heartbeat, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then slowly the applause began. It started as a soft clapping, hesitant but grew rapidly, filling the room with energy and excitement. People stood, cheering, some shouting words of admiration, others simply clapping with wide smiles. She could hear the astonishment in their voices, the genuine admiration that went beyond politeness. She let out a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and exhilaration. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she smiled, overwhelmed by the reaction. The piece had been everything she hoped it would be and more. It was her story, her emotions, her essence laid bare, and the audience had felt it. They had heard her, truly heard her, and that was a power unlike anything she had ever known. The manager approached, his face alight with pride. "You've done it," he said simply. "I knew you had it in you." "That was extraordinary." She nodded, unable to speak for a moment, still letting the echoes of the music settle in her mind. The audience continued to applaud, some approaching her to offer words of praise, others lingering to absorb the feeling. People she had never met were coming up to thank her, telling her how moved they were, how the music had touched something deep inside them. For the first time in her life, she understood the true power of music. It wasn't about skill or technique alone. It was about honesty, emotion, and connection. It was about opening yourself completely and allowing others to feel what you feel. She had hidden this part of herself for so long, afraid of judgment and failure, but now she realized that vulnerability was strength. After the applause settled, she sat for a moment, letting her hands rest on the keys. The cafe was still buzzing with excitement, but she felt a calmness she had never known. She had faced immense pressure, taken a risk, and created something that had resonated deeply with others. She had turned fear into art, hesitation into courage, and doubt into triumph. That night, as she walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, she felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond words. The city seemed quieter, gentler, as if it was celebrating her achievement along with her. She thought about the years of practice, the sacrifices, the hidden melodies that had never been shared, and she felt a profound gratitude for every struggle that had led her to this moment. In her small apartment, she sat by the window and opened her notebook, fingers tracing the lines of compositions she had created but never played. The night was quiet yet filled with possibilities. She began to write again, inspired by the experience, by the knowledge that her music could move people, change moments, and touch hearts. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream bigger. The piano was no longer just an instrument in a corner of a cafe. It was a voice, a way to connect, a path to a future that had once seemed impossible. She felt a determination growing inside her, a sense that this was only the beginning. The critics, the audience, and even she herself had witnessed her potential. And now it was time to embrace it fully. As she finally closed her notebook and turned off the lights, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had faced the highest pressure she had ever known, performed her most personal music, and emerged not only successful but transformed. The experience had shown her that courage and vulnerability could create beauty that words alone could never capture. And in the quiet of the night, she allowed herself a small smile, knowing that her music would continue, growing, evolving, and touching lives in ways she had never imagined. The masterpiece she had played had silenced critics, inspired hearts, and most importantly, reminded her of the power she had always carried within herself. The days after her performance passed in a strange blur. The cafe was busier than ever, filled with curious visitors and regular customers who lingered longer, hoping to catch a glimpse of the pianist who had captured hearts. People talked about her music as if it were magic, and though she had always doubted her own worth, their admiration made it clear that her talent had not gone unnoticed. She continued to work her shifts as usual, pouring coffee, serving pastries, taking orders and moving gracefully between tables. The routine felt comforting, grounding her after the emotional whirlwind of her performances. Yet beneath the surface, something had shifted. She no longer felt like the timid waitress hiding her talent. Instead, she carried a quiet confidence, a sense that she had finally stepped into her own. Every note she had played, every chord that had filled the cafe, was a testament to the years of perseverance, practice, and silent dreaming. The manager approached her one afternoon, a familiar gleam in his eyes. "People are asking if you'll perform again soon," he said. "Some even suggested you play at bigger events. I think you should consider it," she hesitated. The thought of performing on larger stages was thrilling, but it was also terrifying. She had never imagined leaving the safety of the cafe, never imagined stepping into a world where expectations would be even higher. But then she remembered the feeling of the piano beneath her fingers, the quiet satisfaction of creating something that moved people, and she realized that fear no longer held the same power over her. I'll think about it," she said finally, a small smile tugging at her lips. That evening she returned to the piano, alone in the quiet cafe. The space was familiar, comforting, and the keys felt natural beneath her fingers. She played softly at first, letting her hands remember the flow of the melodies that had carried her through the past weeks. But as she played, she began to improvise, creating new passages, exploring emotions she hadn't yet expressed. The music felt alive, almost as if it had a mind of its own, guiding her through moments of joy, sorrow, and hope. The next few weeks brought more attention. People wrote about her performances online, praising her talent and sharing their experiences. Invitations arrived from small venues, community events, and local music gatherings. Each one filled her with both excitement and nervousness, but she realized that she no longer feared the unknown. She had faced her doubts, her insecurities, and had discovered a strength within herself that she hadn't known existed. One afternoon, a journalist approached her after a performance. She had expected polite curiosity, but the questions went deeper. "What inspired you to start playing again?" the journalist asked. "How did it feel to perform your own piece in front of so many people?" She thought for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. "I think I had to believe in myself," she said finally, "even when life felt ordinary. Even when I worked long hours and thought my dreams were out of reach, the music never left me. It was always there, waiting for me to find the courage to share it." The journalist smiled, impressed not only by her talent but by her humility and honesty. Her words spread through the article, reaching even more people who were inspired by her story. She began to understand that her journey was not just about music. It was about perseverance, courage, and the belief that dreams could survive even the hardest circumstances. Her life began to change slowly. She was invited to perform at community events, small concert halls, and even local schools, where children were captivated by the sound of her piano. Each performance was different, but the feeling remained the same. A quiet satisfaction that she was sharing something meaningful, something that resonated beyond words. People came to listen not just to music, but to a story, a journey of someone who had faced fear and emerged stronger. Despite the growing attention, she remained grounded. She continued her shifts at the cafe, valuing the routine and the connections she had built with her coworkers and regular customers. They had been her support system, cheering her on quietly, never pushing her too far, letting her find her own way. The balance between work and music gave her life stability, while allowing her to pursue the dreams she had once thought impossible. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, she walked home slowly, reflecting on everything that had happened. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and she felt a sense of gratitude that went beyond words. She thought about the years of hidden practice, the sacrifices, the moments of doubt, and the courage it had taken to face the piano in front of strangers. All of it had led to this moment of fulfillment, of recognition, and of self-discovery. At home, she sat by her window, notebook in hand. The pages were filled with compositions, ideas, and melodies she had yet to explore. She began to write again, letting inspiration flow freely. Each note was a reminder of the power she had discovered within herself, of the journey that had transformed fear into courage and doubt into creativity. The music was no longer just a dream. It was her life, her voice, and her gift to share with the world. In the weeks and months that followed, she began to receive invitations to perform at larger venues. Each opportunity brought new challenges, new audiences, and new expectations, but she faced them with the same quiet determination that had carried her through the cafe performances. She learned to trust herself, to embrace the vulnerability of performing, and to understand that every note she played was a piece of her story, meant to connect with others in ways words could not. The transformation was not just in her music, but in her confidence and outlook on life. She carried herself differently, moved with a sense of purpose, and spoke with a calm assurance she had never known. People began to recognize her not just as a waitress or a performer, but as someone who had overcome obstacles, faced her fears, and shared her gift with the world. Her story inspired others to pursue their own dreams, to believe in themselves, and to understand that perseverance could lead to moments of extraordinary beauty. Even as her life changed, she remained humble. She remembered the quiet mornings before the cafe opened, the solitude of her apartment, and the small victories that had built the foundation of her talent. She knew that without those moments of struggle, without the years of hidden practice, she would not have been ready for the opportunities that now came her way. The music was a part of her, inseparable from the person she had become, and she cherished it as both a gift and a responsibility. One afternoon, she received a letter from a young listener who had attended one of her performances at a community center. The child wrote about how the music had inspired them to start learning an instrument, how it had brought comfort during difficult times, and how it had sparked a dream they had almost forgotten. She held the letter close, tears forming in her eyes. This was the true impact of her music. She realized it had the power to change lives, to inspire hope, and to create connections that transcended age, background, or circumstance. As the months turned into a year, she continued to balance her work at the cafe with her growing presence as a pianist. She embraced each opportunity, each challenge, and each new audience with a sense of gratitude and humility. She understood that her journey was ongoing, that there would always be more music to create, more fear to overcome, and more hearts to touch. But she also knew that she had the strength, courage, and determination to face whatever came next. The cafe remained her anchor, a place where she could return to her roots, where she could remember the ordinary beginnings that had shaped her extraordinary journey. Co-workers and regular customers continued to cheer her on, sharing in her successes quietly but wholeheartedly. And though her life had transformed in ways she had never imagined, she never forgot the hours spent practicing alone, the quiet moments of doubt, and the persistent hope that had guided her all along. One evening, after a long day of performances and visits, she returned home and sat at her small piano in the apartment. The keys felt familiar and comforting, a reminder of everything she had endured and achieved. She played softly, letting the music flow freely, improvising new melodies that reflected both her journey and her dreams for the future. The notes carried emotion, story, and meaning, a testament to the life she had built and the passion she had followed. As she finished, she looked out the window at the city below, lights twinkling like stars, and felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced fear, endured pressure, and discovered a strength she had never known existed. Her music had silenced critics, touched hearts, and inspired others to believe in their own dreams. And most importantly, she had found her voice, her place in the world, and her purpose. She smiled, knowing that this was only the beginning. The journey would continue, full of challenges, joys, and discoveries. But she felt ready, confident, and at peace, carrying her music as both a gift and a testament to the power of perseverance, courage, and the belief that dreams can survive even the hardest circumstances. Her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to everyone who had heard her play, everyone who had been moved, and everyone who had been inspired. And in that truth she found a happiness and fulfillment that could never be taken away, a quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be.